to HogvilleNET YouTube Live. This is our part of our trilogy, the second day, part 2. Yesterday, we went through, Arkansas' schedule, all 31 games, 13 non-conference, 18 SEC matchups. Went through all of that, and today, part 2 of the trilogy, we'll get into recruiting stuff, upcoming visitors for Arkansas. But today, I'm expanding beyond just the Razorbacks. I'm actually going to get into how I view the SEC. We're exactly 8 weeks out to the start of the regular season. I mean, 56 days, 7 days a week, times 8, 56 days. That's when things tip off for a lot of teams, November 6th. And I'm going to go through how I see right now, this far away, this vantage point, the SEC pecking order, 1 through 16. We've already seen some opinions out there. For example, CBS Sports' John Rothstein had his power rankings he put out a few weeks ago. We've already seen Joe Lunardi with ESPN, the bracketologist, does a really good job of that. He's got 10 of the 16 SEC teams projected for the NCAA tournament. Of course, all these are early looks. We're 8 weeks from the start of the season, but some of these things, we know they happen. Opinions happen, and then they get out there. And so I'm going to jump out with mine. I've really been paying attention to what teams did in the offseason and the transfer portal. You try to keep an eye on injury situations, things like that. And so this is obviously so far out that these opinions will change. I might have more opinions on this and come on and do more of this before we ever tip off the first game. So can't wait to hear your rankings, Kevin. Okay. Jessica Davis, thank you. Kentucky fans think we are trash, so I'm curious where you see both. Yeah, so, I mean, we're going to jump into this. By the way, my name's Kevin McPherson. Sometimes I forget to introduce myself with HogvilleNET, Pig Trail Nation, Drive Time Sports here on 103.7 The Buzz Radio. So I cover the Razorbacks basketball, recruiting, high schools in the state. Most of you know that. Anybody that's joining in because they're interested to see from other SEC schools and fans that see that we've got a power rankings going out. Just a little bit of description for myself. I've been covering the SEC for a while now. But really, diving into this, there's some things about the league I think that matter. Expanded by 2 teams, Oklahoma, Texas. Won't spend a lot of time talking about that right now. You've got 2 new coaches in the league out of 16 teams. And you've got 2 coaches in the incoming programs, Texas and OU, that are new to the SEC, but they're certainly veteran coaches. So I don't know how much value you put into that. But it's a strong conference. Again, Lunardi projecting 10 teams into the NCAA tournament already. And again, I may change my opinion and express that before we even tip off the season. But right now, this is how I see it. And look, I want to also mention that the SEC had been kind of frozen out of the Final Four in recent years. Alabama changed that. Alabama, when you look at Nate Oates, has been I think he's been the poster boy the last handful of seasons for coaching in the SEC. And Alabama's got 2 regular season titles in the last 4 years, and then got the SEC back to the Final Four last year. Bama gave now 2-time defending UConn it's all it wanted. For most of that game before losing by double digits. We know UConn blew everybody out. But that's where I'm going to start off with is Alabama. Number 1, I think Mark Sears, the guard that's certainly given the Razorback fits over the years, given a lot of teams fits, was a star in that NCAA tournament last year. It starts with him in the backcourt. Great stop-and-go game. His reads, I won't say they're flawless, but they're really, really good. It starts with Mark Sears. I think he's going to be probably most people's pick for preseason SEC Player of the Year. He's going to be on national award watch list. Alabama's going to get national number 1 rankings. When you start looking at some of the polls that come out, there's going to be a lot of that. Certainly going to be most everybody's pick to win the SEC, a really good deep SEC. We're going to get into it. But I've got Alabama number 1. Grant Nelson, who I thought was up and down last year. If you looked at the final stretch of regular season, he started putting together some double-doubles, got in the NCAA tournament, and really started to feel himself. And I thought he really started to mesh better with that Alabama roster and the rotations that were on the court. I thought he really got more comfortable, and as the stakes got higher, he seemed to raise the level and the style of his game. Alabama went out in the portal and got a strong big man, a guy that is an anchor down low. Cliff Omarui from Rutgers, the big man transfer, considered one of the top transfers out there. Reitzel, the scorer shooter, is back off of last year's team. He was a big factor in the rotation. And one of those guys, when you look at Nate Oates, and they like to run a volume of threes, get up a volume of threes. Certainly, they want their efficiency to be there or get to the rim and the foul line. Reitzel is one of those guys that help you space the floor, and he has to be accounted for. There's other pieces. Alabama recruited the high school ranks well. Darian Reed is one name that comes to mind, but this is a really good roster, and it's got that Final Four experience and two of your key players, and Mark Sears and Grant Nelson. So I start off with Alabama as my pick right now. I don't see how this is going to change barring injury or some other unforeseen attrition with the success Bama's had in the SEC in the last few years. Now the NCAA tournament, the first Final Four in Tide program history. And I think they can build on that, and I think they can win their third league title out in the last 5 years. So Alabama's looking strong. I'm going to stay in the state of Alabama. We go to the second team here, the Auburn Tigers. Auburn brings back its share of players that have contributed to a team that's been at the top or near the top of the SEC in recent years. It starts with Janai Broome, the big man who will be in the conversation for SEC Player of the Year, I believe, at least preseason. He's one of those guys, if you had to pick two or three names, he's in that mix. He's back at Auburn. And really, when I think about Bruce Pearl and the way that they've scheduled in the non-conference, if the SEC's loaded, I mean, this is what Auburn has in non-conference. Auburn's going to play Houston. They're going to play Duke. They're going to play Ohio State, and they're going to play Purdue. Those are four marquee games in of themselves. And then they're also in the Maui Invitational. And they start out with one of the best programs in the Big 12, Iowa State. And then they're going to have two more games over there. So they're going to have at least 7 marquee matchups. They're going to be, with a veteran team, they're going to be, ready to, I think, maybe challenge Alabama for bragging rights at the top of the league standings. I still think Alabama's number one there, but keep an eye on Auburn as a team that could potentially do that. But outside of Janai Broome, they're bringing back Chris Moore. Pearl's done a really good job of bringing back 4th and 5th year guys. Chris Moore will be his 5th season. West Memphis native Dylan Cardwell, the big man, seems like he's been there forever. Gives them depth on the front line. J.P. Pegues, everybody wanted him coming out of the mid-major levels. Really talented lead guard that can also score, facilitate. He really understands the game and knows how, to get teammates involved. Now he's stepping up to the high major level, and he's moved over to Auburn. And so I really think this Auburn team's got a chance to maybe challenge Bama at the top. There'll be other teams as well. It's not like Alabama's completely on an island and everybody else is 3 or 4 games worse. Last year, let's not forget, Tennessee won the SEC outright. We're going to get to the Vols here in a little bit. Won it outright, but only by 1 game. And that margin was only better than 4 other teams. You had 4 teams tied for second at 13-5, Tennessee at 14-4. And then you had a 6th SEC team with an 11-7 league record. Everybody else was 500 or worse. So at least 6 deep, the SEC, if you see something like that again, it's not that Alabama's going to run away with it. They might not. But I think Auburn's one of those teams that can challenge. So I've got Auburn in second here in my first power rankings. In the third spot, I've got the Arkansas Razorbacks. And look, I just went through the cluster of teams tied for second last year, only 6 teams with league-winning records. This has got its own, this season will have its own context and meaning, but we typically see some of these things play out where there's not a lot of separation between teams. So bear in mind that when I go through these rankings and how I sort teams, the team that I've got second or third, could end up swapping places with teams that are ranked 8th, 9th, and 10th on this list. Again, Lenardi says 10 right now. SEC teams look NCAA tournament worthy, at least from this vantage point, 2 months out, 8 weeks out. And so there'll be some up and down on this and teams moving up. And then there'll be some surprises. In those bottom 6, there might be a couple of surprises that go out and have NCAA tournament kind of seasons and do better than we think. And then some of the teams we think that are projected now, whether it's injuries or they just don't come together, there's a lot of displacement on rosters, a lot of turnover. You just never know. Sometimes on paper it looks great. You're familiar with the body of work of certain players, and then it doesn't quite gel or come together. So no team is immune for that. I think Alabama's probably the one that's probably best situated I think Auburn's second. And I think Arkansas's third. Look, Arkansas returns one player, Trevor Brazile, but a new head coach in John Calipari. He's still the dean of SEC coaches. Been in the league forever, 15 years at Kentucky. We know his resume as a recruiter. We know his resume outside of the last handful of years in postseason NCAA tournament has been really, really strong. But an excellent coach. And so, he's going to bring, to me, he's built a roster. It's a little bit unique. He's only going 9 deep. Beyond the top 9 guys, and typically when you look at rotations for most teams, 8, 9, 10, that's it. So there's nothing spectacular about that other than what about attrition? What about injuries? What about illness? What about foul trouble in a game? Usually you have a little more depth beyond the top 9 or guys that are serviceable that you can plug in. I don't think Arkansas necessarily has that. But so every team's got their weaknesses. I've just gone into a little bit of Arkansas's, but what are the strengths? Trevor Brazile's back. Calipari, of the 9 guys that he's going to count on, 3 of them, a third of them, he brought with him from Kentucky's roster last year. Another 3 were Wildcat signees, high school players, 5-star guys that he's going to be relying on to fit into this rotation. So 2/3 of those players are effectively players he brought with him. He brought most of his coaching staff. And we can talk about postseason all we want. Calipari's teams typically are very strong in the regular season as it is, and they fit. Last year, for example, Kentucky was one of those 4 teams that finished in a 2-way tie at 13-5 in the SEC. There's no guarantee of anything here, but I do think he's assembled a roster. When I look at Nelly Davis, who he brought over from Florida Atlantic, Jonas Adu, who he peeled away from Tennessee, those talented freshmen, Boogie Flan, Carter Knox are some of the names there. And then Adu Thiero and DJ Wagner. I think these guys are could be verging on breakout seasons. So I like Arkansas here in the 3rd spot. I think, again, this is interchangeable. You could slide in 4 or 5 teams in any numerical order here when you start looking beyond Alabama and maybe Auburn. But I think I've got Arkansas next. Here's another one that might surprise some folks. I think Todd Golden at the 4 spot, Florida. I think Todd Golden's done an outstanding job there. Florida was the team that finished 11-7, ranked much of last year, ranked part of the year, made it to the NCAA tournament. But I like the job that Todd Golden's done at Florida, and I'm going to sneak them up to 4th. Maybe a little bit high, but right now, looking at some of the other things, some things I'm not sure about, I'm going to go ahead and do the Florida Gators in the 4th spot. Walter Clayton Jr. is back, one of the top players for the Gators last year in the backcourt. There's a team with a lot of size in the front court. Will Richards back. Alex Condon, one of the big men on the front line. And then there's some depth. Elijah Martin, who they brought in out of the transfer portal. Talk about Nelly Davis for Arkansas out of Florida Atlantic. But Elijah Martin, one of the key pieces to the Florida Atlantic team that 2 years ago went to the Final Four. He's transferred into Florida as well. A 7'9" player, incoming freshman. We'll see how much playing time he gets in Olivier Roux. I saw him play in the Adidas 3SSB circuit. The first time I saw him, I didn't believe my eyes, 7'9", but he's on that roster. So I've got Tennessee in the 4th spot, Florida in the 4th spot. Then we move to the 5th place team I've got here. Sweet McFadden figure, thanks. Yeah, we've got some goodies here in the mini bar. I've never done anything in here in terms of the HogvilleNET YouTube lives, so I hope you like that. Darren McFadden, for those of you that have been sleeping for the last 20 years, one of the greats to do it in the SEC and in college football. But I've got Tennessee. Look, this is the defending SEC champion. Tennessee did had a great season in postseason, getting to the Elite Eight under Rick Barnes, veteran head coach. Tennessee's always in the top of the league. If you look back consistently, top 4-ish, and won it outright last year. But you've got Sakai Ziegler, the lead guard, very, very versatile guy in terms of what he can do defensively as a pest, but on offense, setting guys up. He's a streaky scorer, but he just knows how to play the game, and he knows the SEC. When you got lead guards that are veterans in the league, I always give those teams a little bit of favor because they've been there, done that, and they know how to help make their teammates better. Meshack is back. A couple of players out of the portal that I've kept an eye on and thought, can really help this Tennessee team that lost some pieces. I mentioned Jonas Adu on the front line, all-league performer to Arkansas in the offseason, but they brought in Chaz Lanier, and Darlin Stone DeBar, two players that I think will help this team. There's other, their depth goes beyond the names I just mentioned. I'm just going to hit on a few names with each team, kind of bring out the ones I see key and could be key coming out of the portal, because we know the portal is such a huge part of what makes or breaks teams moving forward, because there's a lot of rebuilds on rosters, some of them more than others, but it's gradually getting to the point where teams are at least retooling half their rosters year in and year out. So I've got the Vols in the 5 spot. They might, I'm not convinced that they'll finish that well, but again, consistently they've been top 4, and I've moved them outside of the top 4 because I do still have some question marks for the Vols. But again, these top 5, we've gone through 5 now of the 16, and I would place or say that these are all teams that can position themselves to have really good NCAA tournament at-large seedings. Obviously, someone's going to win the SEC tournament. There's 16 teams. That team gets the automatic bid. Probably going to be a strong team that was going to get a great seed anyway. Might help their seeding, might not. But I think at least those 5. This may surprise some people. At number 6, I've got the Texas A&M Aggies under Buzz Williams. This is a team that's brought back so many key pieces on its roster, and it has every year. It's one of those things where there's not a lot of pros coming out of A&M, and they just come back, I guess, for the NIL money. Whatever. I'm not judging that. I'm saying this is a team with a lot of experience. This is a team that's going to be projected top 3 for a lot of people when you see SEC projections. I have bumped A&M down, and here for mainly one reason. The Aggies are enigmatic. They are never they never quite live up to what you think they will, whether it's in non-conference play, where by the time they get into the SEC where they're good, they've shot themselves in NCAA tournament. Their resume is not very good. Their net ranking's not very good. 2 years ago, A&M finally broke through, had a bad non-conference, one of those scenarios I just described, but then gave Alabama all it wanted in a run for that league title 2 years ago, the regular season SEC. A&M finished just short, just behind Alabama, who won it. A&M made the NCAA tournament and lost in the first round. This past season, there are a lot of high projections for A&M based on what they brought back. But the Aggies had a better non-conference, and they got in a league play, and they were a middling team. 9-9. I think they had to win their last 2 league games, something like that, to get to just to break even. And they did have a good enough resume to make the NCAA tournament. The net rating was strong, and they actually won a game, lost in the round of 32. A&M still an enigma to me, despite bringing back Wade Taylor IV. He'll be one of those guys, first-team All-SEC guy that they're going to talk about a little bit as a possibility, depending upon how A&M does in the league overall and what he does as player of the year in the league. They don't hand out the awards just because one guy may look like a front runner, but he'll be one of the front runners. They get Manny Obaseki back. Henry Coleman III, the transfer from Duke, it seemed like 20 years ago. He's back. Anderson Garcia, one of the most gifted blue-collar playmakers. Usually you don't hear about blue-collar guys being playmakers. Dennis Rodman was one of those old school, going back to one of the greatest rebounders and defenders ever. But Anderson Garcia is one of those guys that can be a double-double machine, really good player. They've got Hefner, the shooter that comes off the bench. They've got him back, Solomon Washington. A&M's got, when you look at them on paper and you look at what some of these guys have done and some of their accomplishments, you're going to understand why there will be projections for this team to be top 3. I've got them at 6 for reasons given. We'll see if they do. I'm going to stay in the state of Texas now. Newcomer Texas under Rodney Terry, who inherited that job effectively with the stuff that ran Chris Beard out. He's now, we know, in the SEC, been over at Ole Miss. We're going to get to the Rebels here in a little bit, but Texas, I've got Texas in at 7. This is a team where, when you look at Lenardi's NCAA tournament projections, he had Texas as a 4 seed, one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the league. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure about what Rodney Terry's doing over there in terms of how he's able to get his team to play at the highest level, because he's certainly got some really good players. A lot of transfers. Looks like many teams. I think Texas is going to lean on a transfer-heavy starting lineup and rotation. Tremont Mark, the Arkansas Razorbacks' leading scorer last year, is off to Texas. He's started at Houston, was part of Sampson's big winning seasons at Houston that included a Final Four and a Elite 8. Then he comes to Arkansas. It was a failed experiment last year. Arkansas had a losing record. He was the team's leading scorer. Arkansas did have 3 or 4 really quality wins, and he was a big part of that. but Tremont Mark is now moved on to Texas. Will bring length to the wing, as does Trey Johnson, a 5-star. This is what, look, this guy was at one point the #1 player in the class of 2024. A top 10 rated 5-star, has all the length, size, shooting ability, scoring ability. He's a projected lottery pick in the next draft. He's a one and done unless things just go terribly wrong there at Texas. And then Jordan Pope, one of the most coveted lead guards out of Oregon State in the portal in the offseason. Texas gets him. Arthur Kaluma, kind of an up and down guy, another 5-star coming out of high school, another highly rated player. But spent time at Creighton and Kansas State, back in the portal. Now he's at Texas. So you see that, and then the big man, and I can't read my handwriting. Caden Shedrick, already knew his name. Caden Shedrick is back. So Texas has got. When I look at their top 5 and some of the depth pieces, I like it. Again, I'm not convinced. Where the program's headed under Rodney Terry's leadership, it doesn't mean that we're going to see this year something positive on that. And I change my mind and I say, okay, this guy is moving that program not only forward, leaving the Big 12 to the SEC, but now he's established himself. I just don't know enough there to feel certain, as tough as this league looks to me, that Texas should be any higher right now, but certainly it could be. And now I've got a tie in the 8 spot. I went ahead and had a tie in here. This is a coin toss for me between Ole Miss and Kentucky. Let's start with the Kentucky Wildcats. First-year head coach Mark Pope did an outstanding job at BYU, former Kentucky player. I've got Kentucky in there. And this is going to be a floor spacing, perimeter shooting team. And this is one of these scenarios. Just how good can that be and how well will that work? Not game in and game out in the SEC. I think there's some opportunities. You look at the depth. I think Kentucky's got a lot of depth and quality depth. But I look at Kirk Kriisa, who's good, who's a facilitator, and a guy that's going to set guys up. And then you start looking at the recruiting in the offseason. Kobe Brea, Jackson Robinson, former Razorback. Even on the front line, Carr will stretch the floor. Williams, the big man that they got out of the portal, maybe not so much a floor spacer, but you got to have somebody that's in there enforcing. So Brandon Garrison, who was on Arkansas's campus in Kentucky, apparently met his NIL demands, and he ended up committing to Kentucky before he ever visited. So that was all about NIL. Good for him. That's all right. But this is a Kentucky team that's got a lot of pieces. I see a lot of floor spacing pieces, and guys are going to try to attack and stretch defenses out. And then how do you attack from there? Again, Pope did a good job at BYU. Promotion to Kentucky, good for him. We'll see what the Wildcats do without John Calipari. I think the game of the year, just in terms of attention, based on optics and dynamics, is in the SEC. Will be Arkansas at Kentucky in Rupp Arena on February 1st. It's the only time these teams play. I think it's a shame. I think Arkansas and Kentucky should play round robin every year. They're the 2 strongest programs in league history. Obviously, Kentucky, kind of in a perch of its own, but Arkansas has been the second best program in this league ever. And so I'd like to see that, but it's not. But that's going to be huge. It's John Calipari back in Rupp Arena again. I mentioned Arkansas's got 3 players that he brought with him from Lexington, 3 recruits that had been on board to be Wildcats, if not for the Calipari move, and now they're Razorbacks. I think that's a big deal, and I think obviously the nation's going to have its eyes on that game. There may be some game that has more importance somewhere down the line in terms of determining a league outcome or seeding, who's the better team regardless of their league record, and they match up in an important game. We don't know all those things just yet. But what we do know is that storyline I just mentioned. So for me right now, that's the game of the year in the SEC is Calipari's return to Rupp Arena. Ole Miss under Chris Beard, this could be the season. I liked his off-season recruiting in the portal. I like what he did on the front line with Malik Dia, the transfer, as well as Mikel Jones. Mikel, I always flip these around. I get it wrong. Mikel Brown Jones, the hyphen there. So I like those front line pieces. Matthew Morrell, an all-league guard, is back. Jeremy Brakefield is back, a talented, a versatile wing, versatile defender, that is. But, Dre Davis out of the portal. So this is a team, Ole Miss to me, I mentioned Kentucky and Ole Miss, tied at 8th in the 8th spot here, the 8th and 9th teams. starting with Arkansas, maybe even Auburn, going through this to where we are now, you could maybe interchange some of these teams and it may play out that way. Again, I think the margins are very narrow in terms of what it looks like on paper and the strengths of personnel and the combinations, and then what teams did bringing in newcomers. I think all of that's interchangeable. It's still a crapshoot. We don't know. This is just how I have it for right now. And I'll throw in Mississippi State. This is the 10th rated team I have on here. Talented freshman guard from a year ago, I think a sophomore now. Or was he a sophomore last year? Josh Hubbard, he's back. Little guard who does a lot. Big playmaker, big dangerous guy. Riley Kugel, the perimeter threat from Florida that transferred in, has been added in here. Cam Matthews, who's an all-league defender on the wing. He's not talked about a lot. Chris Jans does a great job with just down and dirty grind basketball, defensive-minded basketball. And Cam Matthews is back. RJ Melendez on the front line, transfer from Georgia. That may be a key piece, but Chris Jans' teams are tough. And this is another team, one of the 10 teams that Lenardi had projected in the NCAA tournament. These are the 10 teams that I have 1 through 10. Looking at it, I probably have them in different order than some others, like John Rothstein and Lenardi did. When you look at how Lenardi did the seeding pecking order, I have mine a little differently right now. That could change. I see a couple of teams outside of this top 10, the way I have it projected, that can make noise and upset what we think we know right now, or what I think I know and how I've described it. Lamont Paris is back at South Carolina, the SEC Player of the Year according to the Associated Press last year. Carolina was one of those unexpected teams in college basketball, but one of the teams that finished in that four-way tie for second at 13-5 in the league. Didn't have a great postseason. That happens sometimes, but you've got some key players that are back in. Now they lost several of their key players. Talon Cooper, who was an outstanding point guard, is gone. Some other key pieces. But I look at Colin Murray. These hyphenated last names, I twist them around too much. Colin Murray Taylor. I can't read my own handwriting here. Boyles. Colin Murray Boyles is back. As a freshman last year, I know his game, I'm screwing up his name. As a freshman last year, this guy was outstanding. He really hurt the Razorbacks in a couple of matchups, but I really like him. You can build around him. You've got a transfer in from Vandy. Actually, Miles Stutes on this. You've got Jacoby Wright, and you've got Cam Scott. That's the transfer I want to talk about. So, boy, I'm butchering this up with South Carolina. So I will say that I do think this is a team, just based on the track record last year of surprising teams and being as good as they were, the Gamecocks, to me, could be a surprise. Georgia, under Mike White, who made the move over from Florida a couple of years ago, is a team that, to me, has added some interesting pieces. Asa Newell, a 5-star, very versatile guy, big part of some of the Team USA success on the junior national level. He's in. Tyron Lawrence from Vandy, that's the transfer guard from Vandy that can help there. And then you've got, again, Mike White, who had some level of success at Florida, not what they had under Billy Donovan. Obviously, his time expired there, and he moved on. Somtu Cyril, the big man, 6'10s at Georgia, a top 50 rated player in the high school ranks last year, was originally committed and signed with Kentucky, got out of that, and is now with Georgia, playing for Mike White. So you've got some size on the front line there at Georgia. And you've got Asa Newell, who's a very talented guy, again, but he's a freshman. And so Georgia's one of those teams. I think South Carolina and Georgia could maybe upset the apple cart for some teams here and move up a little bit. I've got Oklahoma under Porter Moser, first year in the SEC. Sam Goodwin's back. Jalen Moore, an athletic, versatile wing. He's back. Lost a lot of players. They got Illinois' 5-star from last year, a top 25 rated player that was committed, signed with Illinois, got out of that. Jeremiah Fears, who should see some considerable time trying to help that team. OU's been a team in the Big 12 that's consistently good in non-conference play, not so good when it got into the Big 12. So not so good in league play. We'll see if there's anything that changes with what Porter Moser can do in a new league. I don't know if this roster helps him a lot. Godwin's a veteran guy. Originally played on the West Coast at one of the Washington mid-major schools before transferring a few years ago. His brothers moved on to the program. He's back. I just don't see a lot there for OU to threaten or challenge to do much better than that bottom 6 in the league. Moving on to the 14th team, I got OU at 13. 14 is LSU under Matt McMahon. This is going to be a really newcomer-heavy kind of a team in a lot of ways. Cam Carter, Jordan Sears, Tyrell Ward, Jalen Reed. Those are some of the names to keep an eye on. I've got LSU at 14. Missouri Tigers under Dennis Gates. What a disappointment last year. 0-18, a winless team in the SEC. Lost in the first round of the SEC tournament. A year removed after his first season, Missouri was competitive and was actually an NCAA tournament team, a good team. But he had a top 15 rated recruiting class on the high school ranks in the offseason, including Keonor Boateng from Little Rock Central, a top 35 player in the country, a 6'5", 6'6" wing. He's part of that top 15 rated class. But they also got some interesting transfers. Tony Perkins out of Iowa, Mark Mitchell, a former 5-star that transferred in from Duke, Jacob Cruz from UT Martin. I think he'll play a big part of it. The big man that really helped South Carolina off the bench and give them depth, Josh Gray, has also transferred to Missouri. But going 0-19 last year, I've lost belief that even with some players here and some pieces that might be better than some of these back-end teams, even South Carolina and Georgia, that I have ranked ahead, I need to see more to them to feel certain or feel better about moving Missouri maybe up a little closer. Maybe Gates, is able to capture in a bottle once again the success he had in year one when he surprised a lot of people. If he does that, there may be some pieces there to move up. But right now it's where I have it. Vandy, brand new coach, Mark Byington. A lot of players gone for a Vandy program that really struggled under Stackhouse, seemed to always play well against Arkansas, but really struggled in the SEC, one of the worst programs, unfortunately, for Vandy fans that's been around. A.J. Hoggard, who's been around a while from Michigan State's in the program. Kajani Wright, previously a 5-star big man in high school, has transferred from Southern Cal. 11 newcomers on Vandy. That's where it's at. 16th on my list. So I just ran through 1 through 16. I kind of stumbled and bumbled here toward the end of it as I'm getting a little bit dehydrated. But I will say this. I think, again, it's Alabama at the top right now. I think Auburn, Arkansas, Florida, Tennessee, A&M, Texas, Kentucky, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. 1 through 10, that's how I have it. And I think those teams are the most likely to vie for an SEC, not only an SEC, maybe not an SEC championship for all those teams, but strong enough resumes going to the SEC tournament where they have real at-large bid hopes for the NCAA tournament, and maybe in most cases have locked it up with not much more to do. All right, I'm going to sign off for now. 33 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. If you haven't already done it, please hit subscribe, like, and share. Until next time, see you then.